It is a great pleasure and privilege to have Uncle Graham Atkinson speak to us tonight. He's going to talk about the struggle for land justice in Victoria, the Dja Dja Wurrung journey to recognition as traditional owners. And he will tell us the details of that. And it will also be an opportunity to talk about other Indigenous matters, because quite a lot of exciting things are on the table at the moment. I'd like to say a few words about Graham. I could say a great deal because he's a man with many important successes in the work that he's been doing in the past, but I'll keep it brief, and perhaps you will get a better impression or better understanding of the work that he has been doing as he speaks to us this evening. He graduated from the University of Melbourne with Bachelor of Social Work and Bachelor of Arts, and attended the RMIT for an MBA much later. He currently sits on the boards of the North Central Catchment Management Authority, the Judicial Commission of Victoria, the Federation of Victorian Traditional Owner Corporations, BARPA, and Parks Victoria. He formerly chaired the Dja Dja Wurrung Clan's Aboriginal Corporation and led the Dja Dja Wurrung negotiating team's successful recognition and settlement agreement with the state government in 2013. He was inducted into the Victorian Aboriginal Honour Roll, which recognises Aboriginal people, past and present, who make the most profound contribution to Victoria's Aboriginal community and to the state of Victoria. He was also recognised in 2017 for his lifelong contribution to land justice and the well-being of the Dja Dja Wurrung people. He was nominated for Senior Victorian of the Year 2018. So on that note, I'd like to ask Graham if he'd address us. He'll speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. If you would like to, as we go through, just add the questions or your comments into the chat. Paul Tonson is going to keep an eye on that. And when we break for questions, he'll be able to help choreograph or direct how that will play out. So Graham, if you would like to take the chair, that would be lovely.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jenny. Thank you for those kind words. I also want to thank the Humanists Victoria for the invitation to present tonight. I'm here as the chairperson of the Dulkanya Land Management Board. My presentation tonight is Land Justice in Victoria, the Dja Dja Wurrung journey. It is a journey that I have been on with my community, my people, both Dja Dja Wurrung and Yorta Yorta, for most of my life. And for the past 30 years, I've been closely involved in finding a path for land justice in Victoria. Some of this story I will share with you tonight. In 2010, having listened to the traditional owners in Victoria, the state government adopted a new paradigm for responding to native title claims and passed the Traditional Owner Settlement Act 2010. This act paved the way for the settlement of our native title claim that was first lodged back in late 1997. I am chair of a board that worked to deliver to our people recognition and some compensation for the long journey that we've been on. It is an exciting time for traditional owners in this country as we begin on a new stage of our journey. While we are charting our own course towards self-determination, we can't do it alone. On this slide, we have included the logos of our partners, that being DALP, Parks Victoria, and the Dja Dja Wurrung Clans Aboriginal Corporation, who have been involved in developing the joint management plan for the Dja Dja Wurrung parks. Next slide, please. Our board takes its name, Dalkunya Dja, meaning healing country, from the Dja Dja Wurrung country plan that was developed while we were negotiating settlement of our claim. It was developed by the Dja Dja Wurrung Clans Aboriginal Corporation, who at the time I was chair. And it became what we call the traditional owner group entity that signed the agreement with the state government. The country plan is the aspirational document for my people, their hopes for community, country and culture. It lays out a long-term path to self-determination and recognition. We have set out to create a future for our people that includes opportunities for jobs and economic prosperity. The country plan is a map for promoting recognition, respect, and the well-being of the Jara people. It lays out the goals for healing country and accessing our rights and responsibilities to care for country. I will be talking in more detail, though, about the joint management plan later on. Next slide, please. The Dja Dja Wurrung clans represent 18 families descended from what we refer to as the apical ancestors. These were people that are our ancestors who were living in their homeland prior to European occupation. They were custodians or traditional owners of their ancestral lands, the Dja Dja Wurrung. My family traces our ancestors to before European colonisation, which is corroborated by accredited historical research. I am a descendant of Caroline Malcolm. She is my apical ancestor. Since Thursday, the 24th of October 2013, I am now recognised as a traditional owner of my country, as well as an elder of my community. As a Dja Dja Wurrung person, I have strong spiritual and cultural connections to country and am bound to the land by the traditional owner belief system derived from our dreaming. Today, Dja Dja Wurrung descendants continue in their footsteps of our ancestors and proudly assert their culture, customs, and abide by Bunjal's law, our ancestral spirit, without, of course, conflicting with any Australian laws. Next slide, please. The Dja Dja Wurrung people's vision for country is to ensure that the health and well-being of our people is strong and underpinned by our living culture. Our lands and waters are in good condition and actively managed to protect our values and to promote the laws, culture and rights of all Dja Dja Wurrung people. As this country's First Nations peoples, we are empowered with a recognised place in society and able to manage our own affairs from a strong and diverse economic base. Next slide. The Dja Dja Wurrung people have cultural rights and responsibilities to care for country. We want to be recognised as the first peoples of our lands, which were never ceded, I should say. We want to be seen and respected as in the landscape of our ancestors. In 2006, the Victorian Parliament passed the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities, affirming the importance of building respect for human rights across the Victorian community. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted in September 2007, approximately a year later, by the General Assembly of the United Nations, and was supported by the Australian government in 2009. The declaration is based on the fundamental rights of self-determination, participation in decision-making, respect for the protection of culture, and equality and non-discrimination. Next slide, please. The board that I'm chair of takes its name, Dja Dja, from the Dja Dja Wurrung country plan. As I said earlier, that was developed during our negotiations, and it was developed by the Dja Dja Wurrung Clans Aboriginal Corporation, also known as the Traditional Owner Group entity. The board was established to develop a joint management plan. That is, the Dja Dja Land Management Board was established to develop a joint management plan for the 6 Dja Dja Wurrung parks, which we will explain further in a moment. Just to make a distinction here between the whole of country plan and the joint management plan, the country plan is a whole of country plan for the agreement area, whereas the joint management plan is for the appointed lands, that is, the 6 parks that were transferred to the Dja Dja Wurrung people under the board's legislated responsibilities. Next slide. The lands across Victoria are degraded by the impact of historical mining and agricultural practices. We often refer to this as upside down country. In the mid-1800s, large deposits of gold were discovered in our country, enticing flocks of people who migrated here looking to make their fortune. The miners cut down trees for firewood and buildings, diverted creeks and rivers, and dug holes in the ground, pulling up large volumes of earth. Since that time, mining has been constant on Dja Dja Wurrung country. This has left a legacy of soil erosion, salinity, and toxicity from contaminants such as arsenic and mercury. It will take a long time and many resources to rehabilitate this country, and the parks are places where we can work towards tangible improvements and welcome back plant and animal species that have long been absent. Next slide, please. Just to give you a very brief historical background of the settlement of Victoria. As many of you would probably know, Major Mitchell arrived in this part of the country, in Victoria, in 1835. His purpose was to survey the land for pastoral expansion. We often referred to that as the land grab. Violence and dispossession followed. We have documented 11 massacres on Dja Dja Wurrung country from 1838 to 1859. The gold rush in the 1850s contributed to the golden triangle on Dja Dja Wurrung country. Our natural and cultural landscape was affected, in most cases devastated. Aboriginal people who were present at the time, and these are my ancestors, were restricted to the Franklin Ford Protectorate near Mount Franklin from 1839 to 1848. When that protectorate was closed at Franklin Ford, my ancestors, many of them, were then moved to another mission called Corranderk near Hillsville, and where they remained up till the 1880s. Next slide, please. Just need to give a bit of background as to what made our claim possible. The Mabo decision was named after Eddie Koikoi Mabo, a Mer Islander, the man who led the challenge to the Australian legal system and fought for recognition of the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional owners of their own land. The Mer people mounted and successfully challenged the legal principle of terra nullius in the High Court. The Mabo case ran for 10 years, and sadly, Eddie Mabo didn't live to see that incredible decision. On the 3rd of June 1992, the High Court of Australia decided that terra nullius should not have been applied to the settlement and occupation of Australia. This led to the Australian Parliament passing the Native Title Act in 1993. Aboriginal people Australia-wide welcomed the Mabo decision and the Native Title Act in 1993. In Victoria, communities began to prepare to lodge their native title claims. Very early on, we discovered some roadblocks for Victorian communities whose residence and relationship with their ancestral country was disrupted through mining and agricultural developments. And often we refer to that as the tide of history. Next slide, please. In 1998, 1999, the Dja Dja Wurrung lodged its first claims. So these were small claims. They involved only 4 parcels of land. 2 of those claims, unfortunately, did not meet the National Native Title Tribunal National Native Title Tribunal's registration test. I was very concerned about that, and so I became actively involved in the claim. By 2000, the individual claims were amalgamated into what we call a whole of country claim. And that was the claim that we used to negotiate directly with the state government over. Next. Yeah. Just to give you a bit of an overview of the agreement, or the recognition and settlement agreement 2013 that we signed with the state government. Over a 16-year period. The recognition and settlement agreement acknowledges the special relationship of Dja Dja Wurrung people to their country. It recognises the disruption to the spiritual, environmental, political and economic order of Dja Dja Wurrung people through the arrival of Europeans. It acknowledges the destruction of Dja Dja Wurrung community and culture through successive government policies of land settlement, forced protection and the 1850s gold rush. It acknowledges the survival of the Dja Dja Wurrung people and the legitimacy of their native title claim. It also aligns with the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act 2006. Next slide, please. This slide shows you just a very summarised version of the journey that we took from 1997 up to, say, 2015, 2018. Our journey obviously was helped when the Victorian State Government enacted the Victorian Traditional Owner Settlement Act 2010. Unlike the approach of the federal court under the Native Title Act, the state government's approach focused on agreement making for settling many of the outstanding native title claims across Victoria. Some 3 years later, a recognition and settlement agreement was negotiated and signed between the Dja Dja Wurrung Clan's Aboriginal Corporation and the Victorian Government. As I said earlier, the Dja Dja Country Plan that commenced while we were still in negotiations for the settlement of our claim in 2012 to 2014. In 2014, after the signing of the agreement, the Recognition Settlement Agreement, the Dja Dja Land Management Board was created through the Minister. That is Minister D'Ambrosio. And 4 years later, the Minister launched the Joint Management Plan. One of our main tasks after we were appointed, the sole task, was to prepare a joint management plan of the 6 parks. In 2019, the implementation process for the joint management plan began. The first term of the first board, it was a 3-year appointment, came to an end towards the end of 2019, and a new board, which is for a 3-year term, was appointed in early 2020. Next slide, please. This map here gives you an idea of the six parks that have been transferred over to the Dja Dja Wurrung. These 6 parks have been granted to the traditional owner group entity through the recognition and settlement agreements for the purpose of joint management with the state, that is, Parks Victoria. Aboriginal title is a new type of freehold title in Victoria that relates to Crown land. Grants of Aboriginal title are made by the Minister under this new act that I mentioned before, the Traditional Owner Settlement Act 2010. Holders of Aboriginal title cannot sell or transfer the land. They can't grant leases or licenses or claim exclusive possession. The state retains a right to occupy, use, control, and manage the land. Activities occurring on the land must be consistent with the public land reservation and remain open to visitors. The agreement also safeguards the rich cultural heritage within these 6 parks, including traditional owner and settler sites. So that's European heritage. We look after European heritage as well as the Indigenous heritage. Next slide, please. This part of my presentation focuses on the joint management plan, and I fleshed this out a bit in more detail here. As I said before, the Minister launched our joint management plan in October 2018. And as I mentioned earlier, The plan is aligned to the Dja Dja Wurrung country plan. The country plan had 9 goals, and the joint management plan followed very closely those 9 goals as part of the joint management plan. Translating the aspirations of the Dja Dja Wurrung people into a plan for joint management with Parks Victoria for the 6 Dja Dja Wurrung parks was a real challenge, but we achieved it. It involved extensive engagement with the Jara, that is the Dja Dja Wurrung people, and it also involved a 2 months public consultation from April 2019 to June. June 2018. We received 160 written submissions. When we come forward now to current times, 2019 to 21, at the moment, the implementation of the joint management plan throughout the 6 parks is well underway. Next slide, please. This is a nice photo of the when the plan was launched by the Minister, Minister Lily D'Ambrosio, and our partners that were present on that day, which were DELP and Parks Victoria, and also members of the Dja Dja Wurrung Clans Aboriginal Corporation membership. Next slide, please. The joint management partners are responsible for implementing the plan. We have a Dja Dja Wurrung ranger team embedded in the parks, the 6 parks, and that is a very successful arrangement. Next slide. Implementing the joint management plan. The joint management plan has a 15-year vision and a schedule for delivering tangible joint management goals and outcomes by 2033. The plan identifies 96 separate strategic actions, which includes cultural protections, signage, reduction of invasive species, improvements to visitor amenities, and reintroduction of cultural fire into the landscape. The board commissioned a costing report which assessed the implementation funding needed to implement the plan at around $20 million over a 15-year period. A significant investment in parks management to be delivered through the Dja Dja Wurrung settlement agreement. In February 2021, there is good progress being made, with 6% of actions rated as on track and over 70% being implemented to some extent. It is to be expected that there are still a number that are planned, as it is early in the implementation of the plan. Folks, this is an exceptional good news story that we are trying to bring to the wider community. At times, we have been disappointed that the mainstream media gives little attention to the constructive outcomes that are rewarding the patience of our people and successive state governments. We are quietly transforming management of the Parks Estate in Victoria and delivering something world-class and special. Next slide, please. We are implementing our joint management plan against the backdrop of some other historic and important processes that are underway. In 2016, the Premier of Victoria committed the state government to discussing treaty with Aboriginal people and communities. In July 2016, the Aboriginal Treaty Working Group was formed, and in December, the Aboriginal community began treaty discussions. In 2019, the first People's Assembly of Victoria was formed. That assembly is the elected voice for Aboriginal people and communities in future treaty discussions. Representatives to the assembly were elected from Aboriginal communities and traditional owner groups in Victoria in 2019. There are 25 representatives. Trent Nelson, chairperson of the Dja Dja Wurrung Clans Aboriginal Corporation, is the Dja Dja Wurrung people's elected representative for the 18 individual clans that make up the Dja Dja Wurrung, being part of the Kulin Nations. Truth-telling, 2021. The first People's Assembly of Victoria and the state have made a shared commitment to truth-telling through the Uruk Justice Commission. Truth-telling is a process of openly sharing historical truths after periods of conflict to allow societies to move forward in a more inclusive way based on justice and human rights. These important projects are underway and a lot of care is going into the process to make sure we get it right. Next slide. Last slide, I should say. This is a picture taken 2 weeks ago when we visited Mount Kiora. The picture shows a smoking ceremony, which was part of the opening part of the meeting at the new shelter at the Kiora State Park, which is near the Melville camping grounds. It has been my privilege to be on the long journey with my people, the Dja Dja Wurrung, whose spirit, resilience, creativity and hard work is being rewarded with some wonderful opportunities to be involved in the joint management of the 6 state and national parks in north central Victoria. I hope that you will be able to visit these parks soon and experience our country through our eyes for yourself. We welcome the support of the Humanists Victoria Group for our aspirations for country. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you tonight. Thank you.